In the summer of 2002, a buddy and I packed up our bags and moved to Mexico City from Canada to work at this little bilingual school right near the famous Angel. And we also found a place to live, what used to be tenement housing, but had been improved a bit since then and had an eclectic group of neighbors, local and other foreigners too. One guy we're convinced was running from the law, a former strongman competition guy, and he was really fun. He was great with the ladies and lots of fun to exercise and go for a jog with and just hang out. There was a karate sensei with his family, and he was just so, but he'd also just light a fire and play guitar and bring the neighbors together to sing and many others. And then there was Sean. Sean was a bit of a crazy guy, from San Francisco, long-haired, looked like he might have been a hippie back in the day, and had kind of a nasally voice and would always talk about the funniest things. Sean was always kind of, let's just say, really, really interested in the green and always had a kind of a positive attitude and laughed. But over the years, he'd drop these hints of things he'd done and people he knew. He'd mentioned that he had interactions with bands like the Ramones and others in San Francisco, and his brother used to play in these bands or open for these bands, and you'd be like, is this guy for real? He'd talk about how he worked on a cruise ship and met his first wife who was from a very wealthy, well-to-do family in Mexico City, and we never really saw her, but every now and then we'd see his kid, and you'd think, oh, maybe, but he was just living in this kind of one-bedroom little house in the garden of this apartment area, and he just always fun and always had stories. He'd talk about how his dad was a Marine and a surgeon, or his mom was a real estate agent and a teacher, but his dad invented this or performed that, but it'd be few and far between. But over the years, you piece it all together and you think, maybe this guy might have been running for the law too. But he sure had a whole bunch of adventures. He was pretty tight-lipped about it. But, 5-6 years later, I stayed in Mexico City for 10 years. We met his brother. And his brother, yeah, sure enough, was a cool dude and talked about the rock and roll days. But just like Sean, never went into too much detail. So I left Mexico to work in different countries, but came back 7 years later. So this is about 17 years after I met Sean. And just recently, there was a knock at my door. And when I opened it, there was an envelope, and it had a cassette tape in it. And this cassette tape was filled with 2 hours of recordings of Sean basically telling his life story. And as unbelievable as it seems, it matches some of the things he said. And, so what I don't know where Sean is or how he got this to me or why he got this to me, but I'm going to share some of the stories that he laid out, and you decide for yourself. Is this Gringo Loco telling a true story, or is it just imagination in his head? And since I received the tapes, I tried to contact him. I can't get a hold of his wife, who I've met. I live in a different city, so it's a little tougher, and I don't know where his kids are, but we'll see if I can find it. But in the meantime, these stories are wild and crazy, so I'm just going to kind of play some clips from some of the tape and let you decide for yourself. Is this guy for real? I don't know, but it sure is a fun story to listen to. Enjoy.
The story starts with Mom and Dad in the 1960s, living in Des Moines, Iowa. Dad, a Navy SEAL, lieutenant captain, inventor of the one-size-fits-all bicycle helmet, doctor, MD, medical doctor, acupuncturist, also climbed Mount Everest, and has done many triathlons. Mom, a school teacher, an artist, a real estate broker, and a mother of 3 beautiful children. The story will also include the music industry, bands A through Z, the movie industry, the family, Max Carr, Hills Angels, Rips, Thugs, Tunnel Man, Cablo, universities, the sports industry, Hollywood, art, cars, helicopters, limos, hippies, war, protest, racism, segregation, fighting for human rights, rich, poor, homelessness, having everything, losing it all, getting married twice, 3 kids, living in a different country. Anyway, Mom and Dad, growing up in Iowa, decided both to go together to New York University, NYU, to become a school teacher, my mom, and Dad to become a doctor. 1964, they had their first son, named after seeing the first James Bond movie with Sean Connery. My dad had to buy the same car, of course, a Jaguar. Beautiful car. I rode in the back seat from Brooklyn, New York to San Francisco, California. The judge told me that I was the first in history to ever receive a speeding ticket on a skateboard. I grew up surrounded by rock and roll firsthand, hanging out in the music studios with the band members of now what are the most famous bands in the world. I took back my board from the hands of the boy that had my skateboard, and I hit him with it. A friend of his behind me then stabbed me in the back with a serrated Bowie hunting knife. I got paid $10 an hour to watch the Doobie Brothers kids. They're not called the Doobie Brothers for nothing. My boss and I had built a relationship of trust, honesty, and respect. I was much more than an employee. I was now part of the Italian family. Anyway, as we walked through the corridor, a very long hallway, at the end was, of course, the biggest dressing room with a star on the door that said Frank Sinatra. And can you imagine this? Hey kid, go get me a drink. Only in your wildest dreams, right? Sinatra asking me to go get him a drink. The funny thing, my boss, the meat man, had just about as much security as Frank Sinatra. And I found this to be very peculiar, very strange, even at such a young age. I was inducted into the family. And it's a very big deal and very special event for anyone and everyone who is inducted into the family. It's an Italian family.